Forget the image most people have of stocking up. It is not a basement full of strange survival rations, and it is not panic buying the day shelves start looking thin. The households that usually handle shortages best tend to do something far less dramatic. They quietly buy ordinary foods before ordinary foods get expensive. That is the whole advantage. And right now, that window still exists in several categories. A lot of stores are still selling through older inventory. Older wheat, older oils, older processed foods made before newer contracts and weaker harvests fully hit retail prices. So many families are still shopping as if nothing has changed, while a smaller group is treating this moment like a brief discount period hidden inside an inflation cycle. That is what this list is really about. Not fear, timing. A neighbor of mine, Sarah, figured this out months ago. She did not overhaul her life. She simply started adding a few specific items to her cart whenever prices were still reasonable. Over time, that small shift cut hundreds from her grocery bill and made her pantry far more useful at the same time. Today, we are going through the 11 foods behind that strategy. Why these items matter, why some of them could get much more expensive, and which versions are actually worth buying. And if you think all shelf-stable foods are basically the same, a few of these may change how you shop for the rest of the year. Let's start with one of the most useful ingredients in any pantry. Canned tomato products are still one of the best quiet buys in the store. Most shoppers focus on fresh produce because that is where price increases feel visible. But canned tomatoes matter for a different reason. They are not just a vegetable, they are a base. One 28-ounce can become pasta sauce, chili, soup, stew, shakshuka, curry, braised beans, or pizza sauce. That is a lot of mileage from something that often costs less than a snack. The problem is happening far upstream. Tomato processors have been dealing with serious disruptions, and California, which drives a huge share of U.S. processing tomato production, took major weather-related losses. If a harvest drops by roughly 20% or more, the effect does not show up everywhere at once. It moves slowly through contracts, warehouses, and then shelves. That lag is exactly why canned tomatoes can still look normal in price right before they stop looking normal. A grocery inventory manager told me some suppliers are already warning of increases in the 30 to 35% range. The smart move here is not glamorous. Buy the store brand. In many cases, the ingredient panel is nearly identical to the premium label sitting right next to it, just with better marketing and a higher price. If a can is $1.89 now and moves toward $2.50 later, that difference, multiplied across a year of cooking, adds up fast. Stored in a cool, dark place, canned tomatoes can hold quality for years, and few foods turn cheap starches, beans, or leftover meat into meals as efficiently. But the next one may be even easier to overlook. Peanut butter has a habit of hiding in plain sight. It feels ordinary, so people stop seeing it as strategic. But in terms of calories, protein, convenience, and shelf life, it is one of the most efficient items in the grocery store. What makes it more interesting right now is the pressure behind the scenes. Georgia and Alabama produce a large share of American peanuts, and drought conditions have not helped. Add higher processing and energy costs, and the result is usually predictable. The jar does not look different, but the price quietly climbs. This matters because peanut butter is not just sandwich food. 2 tablespoons give you roughly 190 calories and around 8 grams of protein. In a tighter grocery month, that is meaningful. It can stretch breakfast, rescue lunch, or turn toast, oats, apples, or crackers into something that actually holds you for a few hours. There is also a small pricing trap here. Many shoppers automatically reach for highly branded jars with added oils and sugar, paying extra for ingredients that do not improve the value much. Natural peanut butter is often the better buy if the price is close. Fewer additives, usually less marketing overhead, and in some cases better long-term storage. A large jar that costs $8.99 today could easily drift toward $11 or $13 if crop pressure and production costs continue. That does not sound catastrophic until you realize how many households buy it repeatedly without ever thinking about timing. One simple trick if you buy natural peanut butter: Store the unopened jar upside down for several days, then flip it back. It helps distribute the oils and saves you from the usual countertop wrestling match. Small detail, but small details are often where smarter grocery habits begin. And once you start noticing that pattern, cooking oils look very different too. Cooking oils are one of those categories people only think about when they run out. That is exactly why they become expensive without much resistance. Most households need them, few households track them, and that makes them easy to reprice. There are a few forces pushing from different directions. Soybean processing issues in the Midwest have interrupted output, and policy changes continue to divert more vegetable oil toward industrial uses like biofuel. Less supply for kitchens usually means more pressure on grocery shelves. It is not dramatic. It is just expensive. The more practical question is which oils deserve pantry space. Stability matters. Coconut oil is unusually shelf-stable and can last for years if stored well. Avocado oil has a very high smoke point, which means one bottle can cover more types of cooking instead of forcing you to keep buying specialized oils. That versatility matters when prices rise. If a bottle of avocado oil moves from $12 to $8, that is a 50% jump on something many families use weekly. And because oil is hidden inside so many meals, baked goods, and prepared foods, rising oil costs hit both your grocery cart and the packaged foods made with it. There is also a mistake many people make with bulk buying. Giant jugs look cheaper per ounce, but once opened, oxidation starts working against you. Several smaller bottles often protect quality better than one oversized bottle you keep opening for months. Store them away from heat and light. The spot beside the stove may be convenient, but it is basically a slow-motion spoilage experiment. And this is where grocery inflation starts getting more serious, because once oils and wheat both begin moving, cheap meals stop being quite so cheap. Pasta still has one of the best cost-to-fullness ratios in the store, but that equation depends heavily on wheat prices staying manageable. Lately, that has become a less comfortable assumption. Global wheat markets have been strained for years, and the effects keep resurfacing. Weather problems, export disruptions, fertilizer costs, and unstable supply chains all eventually work their way into basic foods. Pasta manufacturers can cushion that for a while if they are still using lower-cost wheat bought under older contracts. But once that inventory clears, shoppers feel it quickly. One grain buyer told me many 2026 wheat contracts are running far above earlier pricing. That means some pasta on the shelf today is effectively yesterday's cheaper grain wearing today's package. Once the replacement cost catches up, a familiar box can jump enough to make people wonder when pasta became a budget decision. Not all pasta is equally useful either. Whole wheat pasta gives you a little more fiber and protein, which can make a cheap meal more filling. Dried egg noodles cook faster, which matters if energy costs are high or you simply want dinner done without a 20-minute boil. And if you are storing extra, compact shapes like penne, shells, or rotini are easier to stack and containerize than long noodles. The main storage rule is simple. Cardboard is not long-term protection. Dry goods should move into airtight containers if you plan to keep them. Pantry pests are remarkably democratic. They do not care whether the pasta was on sale. By now, you are probably noticing a pattern. The best foods on this list are not emergency foods. They are foods that keep saving money long after the emergency headline disappears. And the next one may be the clearest example of that. Honey looks expensive until you compare it with how long it lasts and how many jobs it can do. Then it starts to look less like a luxury and more like a very efficient pantry item. What makes honey unusual is its stability. Properly stored honey does not spoil in the normal sense. It may crystallize, thicken, or change texture, but that is not failure. That is just honey being honey. Warm water usually brings it right back. The bigger issue is supply. Bee colonies have been under real pressure, and when pollinators struggle, honey production falls. Smaller producers are already talking about higher prices, and when local increases start showing up, large retail channels rarely stay untouched for long. This is why families who think ahead often prefer raw honey over highly processed honey if the budget allows. Raw honey tends to retain more of what made honey useful in the first place. It is a sweetener, yes, but also a practical pantry ingredient for tea, baking, marinades, and the kind of sore throat remedy people rediscover every winter. One spoonful often feels more useful than an entire bag of candy pretending to be cough relief. If a jar climbs from $7 to $10 or $11, many people will simply buy less and move on. But that misses the larger point. Honey is one of the few foods on this list that can sit for years, still be useful, and reduce waste while doing it. And once you start thinking in terms of nutrient density instead of just shelf life, canned fish becomes very hard to ignore. Canned fish has an image problem. It sounds old-fashioned, slightly depressing, and vaguely associated with emergency cupboards nobody wants to admit they have. Financially, that is excellent news, because it means a lot of shoppers still underestimate it. Fish populations have been disrupted by warming waters, shifting migration patterns, and rising fuel costs for fishing fleets. Those costs eventually land in the can. Several distributors have already warned of tightening supply in categories like salmon and sardines, with possible increases around 30% or more. That matters because canned fish offers something many cheap foods do not: serious nutrition with almost no preparation. Canned salmon can turn into patties, rice bowls, pasta, or salads. Sardines are one of the most nutrient-dense bargains in the store. For people willing to get over the branding issue, they offer protein, omega-3s, and calcium in one inexpensive tin. Not glamorous, very effective. Water-packed options are often the smarter buy. They usually cost less, last well, and let you choose your own oil or seasoning later, rather than paying for lower-quality oil packed into the product. Larger cans can be especially efficient when discounted. An 8-toddler can of salmon that stretches across 3 meals compares surprisingly well with fresh seafood prices, which have become absurd in many areas. And unlike fresh fish, canned fish does not ask for much. No freezer space, no thawing, no nervous conversation about whether it still smells fine. That convenience has value, especially when everything else is getting expensive. But if one category combines low cost, long shelf life, and the power to replace more expensive protein, it is this next one. Dried beans and lentils may be the least exciting item on the list, which is probably why they are also one of the strongest. They are not trendy. They do not have premium packaging. They do not claim to optimize your life. They just save money, over and over again. Legume markets have been hit by drought and erratic weather in multiple growing regions, and some commodity forecasts have already moved sharply higher. If retail catches up, even a food that seems permanently cheap will stop feeling quite so cheap. But the real story is substitution. A pound of dried beans often costs around $2 and can provide protein comparable to many dollars worth of meat. That is where the annual savings become real. Not in one shopping trip. In repetition. Replace enough meat-based meals with bean chili, lentil soup, black bean tacos, or chickpea curries, and the savings can move into the hundreds surprisingly fast. Different types solve different problems. Black beans are versatile and filling. Red lentils cook quickly, often in 15 minutes, which makes them ideal when time or fuel matters. Chickpeas can become hummus, soup, salads, or roasted snacks, and dried chickpeas are dramatically cheaper than canned. There is also a quality-of-life detail people learn too late. Better preparation makes beans easier to live with. Soaking in salted water can improve texture and digestibility. Stored properly in food-safe containers, dry beans can last for years, even decades. Add a few bay leaves if you like a simple pest deterrent. So here is the midpoint question. How many meals in your house are more expensive than they need to be simply because protein always starts with meat? Once you see that pattern, the grocery store starts looking less like a menu and more like a pricing system. And that brings us to flour, which may be the quiet backbone of the whole pantry. Flour and baking essentials do not look dramatic in the cart, but they become incredibly important when prepared foods get expensive. Bread, pancakes, muffins, biscuits, pizza dough, tortillas, even basic noodles all start with some version of cheap dry ingredients and a little know-how. The pressure here is familiar by now. Wheat markets remain unstable, fertilizer costs have been high, and bakers are already seeing contract prices rise. Wholesale moves first, retail follows. That delay tricks people into thinking flour is still cheap because it always was. The strategic move is not just buying flour. It is building a basic system around it. Bread flour if you bake often, because the higher protein helps structure and often gives better results. Baking powder and baking soda, because flour without leavening limits your options fast. Yeast, especially in bulk, because the tiny supermarket packets are one of the most overpriced products in the entire baking aisle. This is one of the clearest examples of paying for convenience packaging. A 1-pound vacuum-sealed bag of yeast can equal dozens of packets for a fraction of the cost. Same function, very different price per use. Storage matters here more than people realize. Flour should go into airtight containers, and if you want extra insurance, freezing it for 48 hours before long, storage can help deal with any hidden insect eggs. Not the most appetizing thought, but a very practical one. Learning to turn flour into food is not just a hobby skill. It is one of the few grocery habits that can directly lower your dependence on overpriced packaged foods. And once protein prices start moving higher, that flexibility matters even more. Canned meat and shelf-stable proteins are no longer just emergency food. They are increasingly a budgeting tool. Beef prices remain under pressure. Poultry has dealt with disease-related disruptions. Pork has faced feed cost issues. And the result is that many families now hesitate in front of the meat case the way they used to hesitate only in front of steak. This is where canned chicken, canned beef, and salmon pouches become more relevant than people expect. Not because they are glamorous, but because they are already cooked, portionable, and often much cheaper per practical use than fresh meat. A can of chicken at $3.50 that stretches into soup, casserole, wraps, or chicken salad can compare well with fresh chicken that costs more and still requires trimming, cooking, and refrigeration. Modern shelf-stable proteins have also improved. Some are genuinely decent. That matters because if a food is theoretically economical but nobody wants to eat it, it is not a saving strategy. It is pantry decor. There is one useful trick here. Rotate more often than you think you need to. Even though these products last for years, using and replacing them every 6 months or so tends to keep quality higher and helps you learn which brands are actually worth your shelf space. Rinsing some canned meats can also reduce excess sodium and improve flavor. The hidden value, of course, is resilience. During outages, bad weather, or just a week when life becomes chaotic, ready-to-eat protein can keep a household functional without a last-minute store run. And that same logic extends beyond food itself to preserving food you already bought. Vinegar is one of the least flashy, most useful items in the store. Most people treat it as a condiment or a cleaning product. In reality, it is a preservation tool, a waste reduction tool, and in some households, a budget tool disguised as a gallon jug. Acetic acid production has faced cost pressure from energy and industrial supply issues, so vinegar is not necessarily immune from price increases. But even if it rises from $8 to $12 a gallon in some categories, it still tends to deliver far more utility than its price suggests. White vinegar can help with pickling, cleaning, deodorizing, and produce washing. Apple cider vinegar has its own loyal following for cooking and light home use. But the most financially useful application may be quick pickling. Cucumbers, onions, carrots, peppers, even eggs can be extended instead of thrown away. That changes the math on produce waste, which is one of the most common ways families lose grocery money without noticing. This is worth pausing on. People obsess over saving 40 cents by switching brands, then throw away $3 worth of vegetables because they softened in the drawer. Preservation is not glamorous, but it is one of the purest forms of grocery savings. Keep vinegar in the original container, store it simply, and use it often. A basic pickling habit can rescue food that otherwise would have become a small household regret at the back of the refrigerator. And once you are preserving and stretching food, the final category becomes the thing that makes all the others easier to eat. Salt and spices are the difference between a pantry and a punishment. That may sound dramatic, But every family that tries to save money by buying only plain staples eventually learns the same lesson. People do not get tired of cheap food. They get tired of bland, cheap food. This category is also more fragile than it seems. Global spice production has been hit by storms, weather disruptions, and labor issues. Shipping has become more expensive, and spices are notorious for carrying enormous markups in tiny grocery jars. The product is often not expensive. The packaging is. Salt, of course, is more than flavor. It is part of food preservation and one of the few pantry basics that is almost absurdly stable. Large bags from restaurant supply stores or warehouse clubs often cost very little relative to how long they last. Garlic powder, onion powder, cumin, paprika, and a few core blends can transform rice, beans, pasta, eggs, and canned proteins from survival food into normal food. The smartest buying rule here is simple. Buy more of your spices from ethnic markets or bulk sources when possible. The difference can be extreme. What costs $4 in a small supermarket bottle may cost the same or less in a bag 3 or 4 times the size elsewhere. Store spices away from heat and light, and if you want them to last longer, whole spices often outperform pre-ground ones. But even ground spices, if bought intelligently, do something important beyond flavor. They protect your willingness to cook from what you already have, which protects your budget from convenience food. And that is really the pattern behind this entire list. The households that handle grocery inflation best are usually not buying exotic products or preparing for some cinematic collapse. They are buying versatile, boring-looking, high-utility foods before everyone else remembers they need them. They understand that the grocery store is full of hidden price logic. Marketing gets attention, packaging gets margins, convenience gets overcharged. But basic ingredients, bought at the right time, still give ordinary families a real advantage. Canned tomatoes turn scraps into meals. Peanut butter turns a snack into backup fuel. Oils keep basic cooking possible. Pasta and flour create cheap structure. Honey keeps almost indefinitely. Fish and canned proteins solve the protein problem without the fresh meat markup. Beans and lentils may be the strongest value on the board. Vinegar reduces waste. Salt and spices make all of it sustainable in real life. That is not panic buying. It is simply refusing to pay premium prices later for foods you already know you will use. So if this list felt useful, the best approach is the calm one. Do not rush out and try to buy everything at once. Just pick 1 or 2 categories each trip. Build slowly. Watch prices. Learn which stores quietly offer the best value. A pantry built without stress is usually the one that saves the most money. And perhaps more importantly, it leaves you with a feeling that is getting harder to buy these days. Control. If this helped you think differently about your grocery spending, consider subscribing. There is a lot more hidden inside everyday prices than most people are ever told.